Okay, see my screen? Okay, so let me just record today's lecture. For today's lecture, we are in the week 7 lesson. It is the introductory part of the case studies of the events, no, in Philippine history that will be tackled in the midterm period. So it's basically will be about Philippine history spaces for conflict and controversies. So from the title itself, it will be about the certain events in the Philippine history that has encountered some sorts of issues no pagdating sa consistencies ng data nito at saka up to now, no, hanggang ngayon, nakaka-encounter pa rin siya ng mga conflicts when it comes to its validity, authenticity, ano pa ba? When it comes to confirming kung ito ba talaga ang nangyari or not. Okay, so maraming mga events in the Philippine history that is ongoing pa ang kanilang interpretation, ongoing pa po ang kanilang study, no? Kasi naman, because history is a lifetime process na hindi siya natatapos. Hindi lang siya lifetime ng tao pala na process. It is an ongoing process. Okay, wala pang history, no? May mga history na tayo na natuldukan, pero may mga history talaga na hindi natin siya pwedeng i-end ang pag-study sa mga events na yun. Especially if those events, no, are very controversial. So, that's the topic for the whole midterm period, excuse me. Okay, so that's the topic for the whole midterm period. Mayroong mga bagay or mayroong mga events in the Philippine history na hanggang ngayon hindi pa nako-confirm, hindi pa siya natatapos, no, ang istorya niya. Kaya we will be discussing and we will be studying these events, no? Some of these events naman kasi hindi naman natin siya realistically cover all throughout the 5 weeks, no? Yung 5 weeks na ng midterm period. Okay, so for today's training objectives, we will be guided by the following. And first is to interpret the historical events using the primary sources. It means that at the end of the semester, no, we will be able to interpret the historical events in the Philippine history using primary sources. Yes po, mag-focus po tayo sa primary sources if nung prelim period, gumamit tayo ng dalawa, no, isang primary source at saka isang secondary source. No, we have determined as well how to critique, no, this primary sources and as well the secondary sources. Pero ngayong midterm po, gagamit po tayo ng primary sources alone. No? Ma'am, iisa lang po ba yung primary source na gagamitin natin? No, no? In some events, for example, the cry of revolution, okay? Sa cry of revolution, yung unang sigaw, isang event lang yun. Pero yung itatakal natin ng mga primary sources, they are multiple. Iba-iba po na primary sources. Mamakala ko primary source, bakit iba-iba sila? Bakit marami sila? Kasi po, yun po yung mga event na mayroong conflict sa ating Philippine history. May conflict po sila sa documentation at saka yung mga primary sources po, they were written by the people that were present mismo, personally, sa event na yun, pero iba-iba po sila ng dinidiscuss sa kanya-kanyang mga primary sources, making the event and the recording of such event conflicted, no, and very controversial. Okay? Na-experience natin siya ngayong time na to, no, sa generation natin, and it's something that is close to fake news. 'Di ba? Marami na silabasa ng mga fake news ngayon. May mga issue sa social media, no, na kumakalat sa social media, pero yung mga kasabwat, no, or mga involved, not kasabwat, but involved na mga tao on that particular issue has different statements. And sometimes their statements are not nagko-coincide with each other. Okay, hindi sila nagko-coincide with each other. Have you nagsabaybay sa case ni Miss Christine Dacera? Okay? Nagsubaybay ba kayo dun sa case niya? Di ba it was a very lengthy, no, and very na case, no, those paspas na to siya sa ingatan na case, no, but natagalan siya because the sources, no, the investigators, no, which come up into primary sources, the witnesses, the people involved, hindi parallel or hindi nagkakatugma yung kanilang mga statements, no? Hindi nagkakatugma yung results ng kanilang mga investigation. Therefore, the case of Christine Dacera is a controversial, no, very conflicted na case that until now, no, it was still arguable. Arguable siya because there are some source that cannot agree, no, with each other, no, cannot agree to the others, no, ng mga sources. Ganun din po sa ating history, no, hindi lang siya nagaganap ngayong present time, but as well as in our history, may mga events po tayo sa past natin na hindi po consistent yung mga data nila. Kaya, conflicted and controversial po sila. So, the second objective is to recognize the multiplicity of interpretation that can be read from a historical text. So, pag-uusapan natin kung ano yung kahalagahan ng pagtingin or pag-study ng isang historical event, no, through its historical texts, no, from the lens of different perspectives. Kaya mahalaga din that in the third objective, we should be able to identify the advantages and disadvantages of employing critical tools in interpreting historical events, no? So, mahalaga na kapag merong conflicting na mga sources, no, and to avoid biases, we need to consult those sources that has opposite motivations. Di ba napag-aralan na natin yan sa source criticism principles or source criticism procedures? Yung dalawang yon, naka-enlist doon na we need to consult the sources, no, na independent, and also we need to consult those sources na opposite ng sinasabi dun sa sources na meron na tayo, so as to lessen or to decrease the tendency of bias. Okay? No? So, ayun po yung learning objectives natin this morning. And lastly, to demonstrate the ability to argue for or against a particular issue using the primary sources. So, sa primary sources po natin, you will be writing some argumentative essay that will express kung alin sa mga primary sources po na i-discuss natin ang mas favor kayo and you think that are more credible than the others. Okay? So, you may use our source criticism procedures and also internal criticism in determining which among these sources is more credible than the others. So, okay, so in today's lecture, no, before we get started into the various case studies and various events na in the Philippine history, it's very important to be introduced to these two very important concepts, na the interpretation and multi-perspectivity. So let's begin first with interpretation and discuss how historical interpretation is very important. Ano ba yung role na ginagampanan niya sa pag-study natin ng history. So, let's begin. According to Geoffrey Barraclough, he defined history as the attempt to discover, on the basis of fragmentary evidence, the significant things about the past. So, according to him, na yung history doon natin, when we attempt to get to know what happened in the past, ano ba yung mga events in the past, our bases are fragmentary evidences. Pag sinabi natin fragment, these are things that are patches, na hindi siya kompleto. Sa English grammar, ang fragments ay set of words that are put into a sentence that does not expresses a complete thought. Okay? Hindi siya complete na body ng isang sentence. Kunyari, it is, no? It is, yun lang, no? It is. May subject siya, may predicate siya, pero hindi siya naglalayo ng buong konsepto. Okay? So, these are just two words, pero sentence pa rin siya. Ang tawag po sa kanila ay fragments. Okay? So, fragments. And in our history, sabi ni Geoffrey, when we also attempt to discover what happened in the past, ang meron lang po tayo ay mga fragments na mga evidences. No? Fragmentary evidences. So, how do we illustrate that? So, here in my screen, if you are in the same screen with me, we have here some broken pieces. Okay, we have here some fragments. So, in the chat box below, in our chat box, can you guess ano ba itong mga primary source na to? Okay, can you guess ano ba itong mga items na ito? What do you think are those items? Jar? Okay, what else? Jar? Yes, it could be a jar. How about the others? Broken pieces of a jar, a vase, pots, clay pots.
Yarn, Mom. URN.
Yes? Again?
Ano, Ma'am? Hindi ko alam paano siya yan, no? Yung lalagyan good ng dead ashes, good, Mom? Or like dead bodies?
Oo. Burial jar. Lalagyan ng abo, ma'am. Food storage. Okay. Yeah. Burial jar. Pwede. No? Lalagyan ng abo, food storage. Lalagyan ng tubig. No? So, basically, wait lang. Tama niyo mga sinabi ninyo, okay? Pero wala namang nagsabi sa atin na pots ang mga ito, no? All we have are just patches, are just broken pieces of a whole thing. No, but we assume that these are pots, no? Lalagyan ng abo. Wala namang nalagay na function dyan, di ba? Walang written data. All we have are fragmented na pieces ng isang pot, ng isang jar, ng isang jug, no? It could be part of their house, baka bathtub ito, no, ng mga ancient something, no? But, no, even though patches lang yung nakikita natin, we have this we have this gestalt psychology ba, no? I think that is continuity, the law of continuity sa gestalt psychology. I don't know if you have social psychology as your subject, pero it's the law of continuity, no? Na parang meron na siyang continuation kahit na ito lang naman na nakikita natin. Parang nag-create tayo ng image kahit na hindi naman buo yung nakikita natin. And sabi niyo dito, these are antique na jars, no? These are used in food storage. These are used lalagyan ng abo. Sabi ng classmate nyo kanina, sabi niya, it's a burial jar. So, it's used to preserve or to place the dead bodies of the community members or the ancient people. So, wala naman nagsabi sa inyo na yun ang role niya, na yun ang function ng bagay na ito. But, no, we had some accepted judgments. No, we have some accepted judgments into what we conclude and what we interpret, no, these jars to be. Right? So, same as true with writing history, no? Yung mga historical evidences po natin available para sa mga historians natin, these are also fragmentary evidences. Remember, facts cannot speak for themselves. Right? Yun yung lesson natin ng prelim, di ba? Facts cannot speak for themselves. Therefore, we need historians to interpret these fragmented evidences that we have at hand. No? So, even though fragmented yung mga evidences natin, no? Ay, dahil nga fragmented yung mga evidences natin, we can say that the history that we read, even though based siya sa facts, it is strictly speaking not factual at all. Hindi po siya 100% facts, no? Even though the basis is facts, no? But these are all series of accepted judgments dependent upon the end of the historian. But we are going to continue this discussion on that after we end the first conference, and let's return using the same link and the same meeting ID. Okay, so sabi natin kanina, we only have fragmentary evidences and it's the end of the historian na kung paano niya i-choose na yung mga fragmentary evidences and use them in the historical interpretation. Okay, so in our interpretation, no, interpretation, sabi ko na tuloy, history is a construct. Okay, history is a construct. So why do you think that history is a construct? Okay, sa chat natin you can answer. Why do you think that history is a construct? Because it is always open for interpretation. Okay? Alam mo yung constructive na term, no? The constructivism na concept na na-discuss natin sa Soksay 102. Ano yung constructivism nga? No? Across time, it just develops, no? Across time, it just develops. History as a discipline, history as a profession, in a professional environment, it is always open for interpretation. It is an ongoing process na hindi po siya natatapos. At tama yung sinabi nyo kanina, construct daw history because it builds, it shapes our future. Na simply because yung past history, past na history pa, na yung history na nalaman natin long time ago, it's still an ongoing process. It continually shapes our society, it continually shapes our community. It is made by historians to make sense of something occurring in the present, no? Tama yun na sinabi ninyo? History is a construct not because we are not just because we are building our history, but also history is also building our society. Na tama yung mga answers niyo. You have the idea, no? Why history is a construct, no? But basically, history is a construct because it is always open for interpretation. Hindi po siya natatapos. So I want you to take note of this one, kung bakit history is a construct, no? Hindi po natatapos yung proseso ng pagsastudy natin ng history, no? What we have learned in the history back in elementary and high school does not anymore have necessarily to be fitted. Hindi siya necessarily have to be realistic or truthful sa ngayon na college na tayo. Bakit? There are existing there are emerging new rediscovered mga primary sources. May mga primary sources tayo na hindi pa siya nag-emerge o hindi pa siya na-rediscover nung elementary and high school pa tayo. Pero ngayong nag-college na tayo, bigla na lang nag-emerge or bigla na lang nag-exist, bigla na lang na-rediscover yung mga evidences that would explain, no, the validity or invalidity ng mga past nating mga history. Okay? So, for example, the medals of Marcos in the World War and those achievements daw would make him a hero, no? As a veteran in the World War. Ngayon, in the history books of the elementary and high school students, na-publish po yung ganun na news, no? Na-publish po yung ganun na factual history sa mga libro ng mga estudyante sa panahon ni Marcos. But because history is a construct, it does not stop there, no? It is always open for interpretation. Hindi nagsistop yung mga historians natin to come up with a rediscovery of primary sources that may serve as an evidence, no? Kaya yung mga researchers, yung mga historians po, nag-consult po sila sa American records, no? And among the records, wala pong any evidence that proves, no, that Marcos had joined such organization or has received those awards, no, making the factual history about the achievements of Marcos in the World War invalid. Kaya ngayon, sa mga libro natin ngayon, wala na yung ganong factual history because it was found out to be invalid. It was found out to be a hoax. Another is the Code of Kalanchaw. No? The Code of Kalanchaw, for the very long time in the Philippine history, sa mga libro din po natin at saka sa beliefs ng mga tao, sa beliefs ng mga Filipinos, we believe that the Code of Kalanchaw was a historical material for us, no? Historical evidence siya ba that will speak about the the ancient culture of the Filipinos even before the writing of Pigafetta. But then again, because history is a construct, nagpatuloy po yung pagsa-study natin about these events, nakakome up tayo ng mga evidences that has invalidated those events na hindi pala siya valid, hindi pala siya totoo, no? It was hoax, no? It was fake news. Okay? So mahalaga po nating intindihin that history is always open for interpretation. Mahalaga din po no what does it tells about us? It tells that mahalaga po na hindi lang yung primary source yung dapat na natin interpret, but yung historical event mismo, i-interpret mismo natin yung history itself. Okay? Kung ano ba talaga ang nangyari. Okay? So, hindi lang po yung existing na source ang kailangan natin i-interpret, but as well as the event mismo. Okay? Kaya, mahalagang isipin at i-consider ang historical interpretation. Okay? So, sa panahon natin ngayon, sa mga history books natin in elementary and high school, yung mga sinabi ko po na mga hoax kanina, yung dalawang event na yun, hindi na po siya nag-exist as a valid historical event. Okay? So, thanks po sa history natin na that it is always open for interpretation. So, naintindihan po ba? Okay? Ayan. So, marami kayong mga ideas dito and they are all somehow, no, related to why history is a construct. It is always open for interpretation. So, that is the first concept, no? Yun po yung unang concept na dapat nating i-consider sa pag-study ng historical events, especially if those historical events are very conflicting and very controversial. So the second concept is the multi-perspectivity. So, what do you think is multi-perspectivity? Ano ba ibig sabihin ng multi-perspectivity? Anyone? Ano ibig sabihin ng multi-perspectivity? Okay? Ano ibig sabihin ng multi-perspectivity? Yes, no? Different views, different beliefs. Okay? iba't ibang perspective na yes. Okay, so that is correct, no? When you say multi-perspectivity, it is consulting, no? Consulting the views of others. It may be opposite to our perspective, but it doesn't mean that if tama siya sa pananaw natin, essentially mali na siya sa pananaw ng iba. Hindi po siya ganon. Multi-perspectivity, it's the respect, no? It's the respect for the views of others. Okay? So, I have here a definition of multi-perspectivity and also a certain illustration. Okay? So, multi-perspectivity in definition given by history books, no? It is the way of looking at historical events, personalities, developments, cultures, and societies from various perspective, no? Sometimes or most of the time, multi-perspectivity, the perspectives are conflicting with each other. As for example, here in our illustration. So there are two men, they are arguing, maybe not, maybe nag-discuss na sila but they are not arguing. But we assume that they are into argument. Into what is the number that is in the floor? Is on the floor, I mean. Ay ba yung number na nasa floor? So, the other person who is facing the other side of the number, sabi niya, it's number 6, no? But the other person, sabi niya, no, it's number 9. Because these two persons, they have viewed or they have just answered based upon the perspective kung saan sila nakaposisyon. Okay? So, the the person na sabi na 6 ito siya is right. The other person, he is telling that this is 9 is also right based on their own perspectives. Okay? But this person who is saying number 6, not because he is correct in his own perspective, in his own position, invalidates na the number 9. Hindi ganoon ang ibig sabihin nun. Okay? And this person as well na naka-position sa number 9, not because he is correct in his own perspective, it now invalidates the answer of the other person. The multi-perspectivity is the respect, no, of the various way of looking at things. Okay? So, ganun din po sa historical event natin. Dahil yung mga historians natin, meron na silang mga fragmentary evidences. Iba-iba po sila ng interpretation. Iba-iba po sila ng mga bias dahil historians, human as they are, they also have their own principles, they also have their own beliefs, they also have their own standings, and it is the right or it is the freedom of the historian to choose whatever ideology, whatever evidence that he wanted to accept, no, to be part of his historical study. Okay? So, historical writing is by definition could be biased, partial, and contains preconception. Kaya mahalaga na pag nag-interpret po tayo ng historical evidences natin, especially if we have multiple primary sources, we need to consider multi-perspectivity, no? We need to respect the perspective of one author with another author. Kasi nga, they have just written, they have just interpreted history based upon their perspective, no? Based upon their accepted judgments and based on their set of beliefs, no? So, historical writing po is biased, it is partial, it contains preconception because historians, before pa sila nagsulat ng history, before pa sila nag-interpret ng history, mayroon na po silang end in mind, no? Mayroon na po silang intended purpose. Diba sa internal criticism natin, may tatlo tayo doon. The knowledge which informed it, the agenda behind its creation, and the other one is the intended purpose of the historian. Bakit niya ba sinulat nun? So, historical writing is now biased and it contains preconception, making various primary sources to be different with each other. Iba-iba yung pag-interpret nila sa event kasi iba-iba rin po sila ng accepted judgments. So, ang tanong, ma'am, dahil nga biased na siya, dahil partial na siya, and it contains preconception, does it mean that we don't have anymore have to believe our historical books or our history textbooks? The answer is no, no? We still have to consider that because remember, we need to consider their perspectives. Okay? These historians have undergone historical methodology, which are the set of techniques that will be used, no, to properly and to legally write historical interpretation, no? Para mag-interpret sila ng mga evidences, they need to undergo historical methodology. So we still need to consider believing into what are written in the history books. But we need to be careful. Kaya nga mayroon tayong subjects na readings in Philippine history rather than Philippine history alone. No? Because in the Philippine history discussion, there is only introduction lang. No? Na-introduce lang tayo sa mga events in the Philippine history and then we will learn from it. We will learn values from it. But in the new curriculum, you are so blessed to have readings in Philippine history because you do not only be introduced to these events na paulit-ulit na lang din na-introduce sa inyo, pero you will be taught of the skills na you will be introduced into realities ba, into engagement in the historical interpretation mismo. Na kayo mismo, kinikritik nyo yung mga evidences that tells about our history. Kinikritik nyo yung secondary at yung primary sources. Back in college, no, hindi naman namin yun nagawa. Yung nag-high school kami or elementary, tayo pala, no? Hindi naman natin to nagawa. But in the college, no, in this subject course, hindi tayo basta-basta hindi tayo basta-basta nagbabasa lang ng history, okay? Hindi tayo basta-basta naniniwala na lang, no, kung ano ba yung present sa mga books natin. But instead, we are informed already, no? We are informed, we are aware of the technicalities, no? We are aware of the tendencies that the historians may put bias doon sa kanyang historical writing. I just hope no, that at the end of this course, you will not read history books the same again. Okay? You will not read, even yung mga news, you will not read journalism, documentaries, you will not take documents. It could be a photograph, it could be something else, no? Same as before, okay? I hope that at the end of the semester, automatic na innate na sa inyo that whenever you encounter a writing, no, whenever a writing is given to you, especially if it's controversial, no, hindi na kayo agad-agad mag-jump into conclusion or hindi na siya consider as factual already. Okay? Especially in our time that madali lang talaga mag-publish ng libro. Okay? Napakadali mag-publish ng post. Napakadali mag-commentary. Okay? But we need to be careful with the intention of the author, no? Bakit niya ba yun pinost sa kanyang audience? Okay? So hopefully you have acquired that value, no, that characteristic at the end of the semester. So the following are the tendencies that historian may commit, no, because of historical interpretation, no, the freedom to choose the fragmentary evidences na kanyang gagamitin for historical writing, and it's also when we consider multi-perspectivity. Ito yung pwedeng nangyari, o ito yung dahilan kung bakit kailangan natin ng multi-perspectivity at bakit kailangan natin suriin at magkaroon ng historical interpretation. Okay. So, number 1 is historians may decide what source to use, what interpretation to make more apparent, depending on what his end is. So, this is aking punctuation mark. Sabi pala dito, the historian may decide on what source to use, what interpretation to make, comma, more apparent depending on what his end is. Okay? So, dahil nga bias, no, and partial. It contains preconception ang ating historical studies, no, ang ating history, no. Kaya kailangan meron tayong i-consider na historical interpretation at multi-perspectivity. Kasi hindi natin alam anong intention ng author, bakit niya sinulat iyon. Okay? Bakit yung sinulat niya iba dun sa sinulat ng kasama niya na pareho lang naman sila nandun sa event. Okay? So secondly, historians may misinterpret the evidence, attending to those that suggest only a certain event happened, and then he may ignore as well the rest that goes against the evidence. For example, historian ka, no? Mayroon kang bias, no? Kasi mayroon naman talaga tayong biases, no? Mayroon kang intended purpose kung bakit mo yun sinulat. But in your primary sources, mayroong mga sources doon, mayroong mga evidences doon na hindi siya consistent with the first evidence that you have. So, some historians, no, for them na ma-prove that the historical event really happened because that's their bias, no, they may ignore the rest of the evidence that goes against their previous evidence. So, ang mga tendency na mangyari niyan is that they may omit significant facts about their subject. Eventually, it would lead imbalance. No, imbalance po yan. So, it would lead to imbalance of the interpretation. Okay? Have you known a certain news, no, na tagpi-tagpi, no? A certain news na yung pagdating na sa audience, yung news, ibang facts na nawala na doon. Okay? Or have you heard someone na nag-explain siya, no? Na-explain siya of a certain thing that happened, pero may mga significant facts siya na tinanggal sa mga statements niya. Okay? So, ganyan po yung nangyayari din sa ating lipunan, no? When somebody is asked to give statements, especially if it's a very controversial case, may mga facts talaga na uumit or natatanggal, no? And then, eventually, it would lead to more confusing na statements. Okay? So, ayun po, lalo na yung paiba-iba sila ng statements. So, historians may also do that. Okay? So, hindi naman po natin sila masisisi lahat. Even though they are professionals, no? Sometimes, the intended purpose will cause them to omit the significant facts about their subjects. Fourth, historians may also impose a certain ideology to their subject which may not be appropriate to the period that the subject was from. For example, the historical event or the subject was an event of the 19th century, or was an event about sa Katipunan. Okay? About sa Katipunan. During that time, no, revolution or the rebellion itself was a sign or a manifestation of brave of being brave and being heroic, right? No, kapag nag-revolt ka noong 19th century sa panahon ni Bonifacio, sa panahon ni Rizal, no, pag nag-revolt ang mga tao noon, they will be considered as heroic, no? We adore them, no? We adore them dahil sa pag-revolt nila, dahil sa pag-rebel nila against the Spanish government. We have attained our independence, no? Naging democratic tayo. Same as true with the time of Marcos, when the nation did the revolution, no? EDSA revolution, naging democratic ang Pilipinas that time. No? We were freed from what bonded us. But that ideology is only applicable that time. If you would see, or if you would view that revolution, no, in the context of the present time, hindi siya maganda, no? Yung mga rebellion natin na nangyayari ngayon against the government, yung mga revolutionary group, no, mga rebellious group na meron tayo ngayon, hindi siya same ideology Same lang sila ng konsepto that they want to go against the government, but the time, the context itself is not the same, no? Kapag nag-revolt ka before in the 19th century, it will be a heroic deed. It will be a very important thing, no, to the nationalism. But in today's context, kapag nag-rebel ka sa government, hindi siya the same, no? Hindi na siya heroic deed. It will be subjecting the whole nation into chaos, right? Kaya yung mga militant group natin, no, that were into against government, no, they are not, no, they are not, their ideology does not fit into the context of our society. Na hindi pala all the time that rebellion or revolution is good for nationalism. Okay? And historians, if they would impose, no, same ideology of different context, no? Same lang, pares lang naman sa rebellion pares lang naman silang revolution no, pero hindi sila pareho kasi ng context, no? So when a historian impose a certain ideology to the subject, which may not be appropriate to the period the subject was from, it may lead us to confusion. It may promote a different message to the readers or to its audience. Kaya mahalaga po na i-interpret po natin yung mga historical writing natin. Okay? So, you may check on if mayroon kayong kapatid or mayroon kayong pamangkin, pinsan, na nagmo-module sila ngayon, na nagmo-module, di ba? Mas maganda pag yung module ay kompleto ang kanyang mga data, na yung mga, at saka readable yung mga nakasulat sa book nila. You may check on their books. Ano ba yung mga certain events in the Philippine history na nakasulat sa libro nila na you think should be subjected to historical interpretation? Or you may consult other sources. So, historians may also provide a single cause for an event without considering the other possible causal explanations of the said events if we do not consider the perspective of other primary sources. Kaya mahalaga po that for the historians to be able to consider multi-perspectivity, no, we need to explore different perspective in history, which requires incorporation of source materials that reflect different views of an event in history. Sabi nga ng classmate nyo dito kanina, your view is not my view, okay? But you're my best view. Okay? So, yung sa fifth natin na statement kanina, that the historians may provide a single cause para sa lahat ng nangyayari. No, na iisang event lang yung isi-serve niya or iisang source lang ang pagbabasihan niya to explain why certain phenomena happen. It may invalidate the perspective of other sources na iba yung pananaw, na iba yung opinion nila in explaining why certain phenomena happen. For example, bakit nagkaroon or bakit nanguna si Corazon Aquino in the EDSA Revolution, no? Why is it that the other politicians, that the other icons in the Philippine society, bakit hindi sila ang nanguna? So, there are some certain source na may perspective sila towards that maybe Cory is concerned with the democracy of our country. Some sources may also give an opinion or give a perspective that because Pinoy, no, was killed by a man, no, na sinugo ni Marcos. They were rivals in the politics. That's why, as a wife, no, nanguna na siya doon kasi is a way of freeing, not only addressing the issue on her husband, but also for the country. No, it's like a medium, no, to gain the favor of the masses. So, dalawang perspective yun that could be true. No, either of them could be true or both of them can be true. Kaya we need to explore the different perspectives in history. And in order to do that, we need to consult in the source materials and then incorporate them into our historical writing. Kaya all throughout the midterm period, hindi lang po iisang primary source ang gagamitin natin to explain a certain conflicting and controversial event. Okay? So, iba-iba pong primary source ang gagamitin natin. Yung mga primary source po na yun, lahat po sila ay valid. Lahat po sila ay sinulat ng mga tao that are present in the event. Ibig sabihin, witness talaga sila. And, iba po sila ng sinasabi. Okay? So, yun po yung challenge natin for this period, for the midterm period. So, for the last part of our topic this morning, let's discuss the advantages and the disadvantages when we incorporate different sources sa ating historical study. No, this will serve as a warning for us and as a guide, no, para hindi naman sobrang dami na ng different sources na ating i-incorporate. Number one, as an advantage, no? Different sources that counter each other or they are different with each other, they are opposite with each other, may create space for more investigation and research while providing more evidence for the truth that these sources agree on. So kapag iba-iba yung mga source na, yung mga primary source na gagamitin natin, we will come up into what is common among them. And we will validate na dahil iba-iba sila ng motivation, iba-iba po sila ng arguments, we may assume that what is common, kung ano yung mga topics or ano yung mga truths, no, na nag-agree both yung mga evidences natin, kahit na conflicting sila, yun ay nag-i-increase ng truthfulness, no? Nag-i-increase siya ng credibility ng message. For example, the source number 1, it says that it was raining on Tuesday. It was Tuesday and it was raining that day, no? Yun sa source number 1. Sa primary source number 2 naman, sinabi niya na it was midnight of Sunday. It was Sunday midnight and the night is pouring and the clouds are or the skies are pouring heavy rains. Okay, so yun sa source number 2. Sa source number 3 naman, it says that it was Wednesday. It was Wednesday and it was raining very hard. Okay? So, iba-iba sila na sinasabi na date, no? Conflicting sila sa dates, pero what is common among them is that it rains, no? It rained that day, or it rained that night, It rained that night. So, if we have incorporated different sources, even if they are countering each other, they are different in their arguments, no? But what is common among them may be validating the truths, okay? It provides more evidence for the truth, sabi dito, that these sources agree on. So, another advantage kung mag-incorporate na tayo ng iba't ibang sources is that mas may motivation tayo, mas may rason tayo for history be open for interpretation. Okay? Hindi po natatapos, hindi po namamatay yung proseso ng history. Secondly is that different source also provide different historical truths. So, yun nasabi natin kanina. Next is that different historical agents create different historical truths which renders to more validity to historical interpretation po ito. Ito, historical interpretation. Next is that when we incorporate different sources, it provides for the audience a more complex, more complete, and richer understanding of the past. Okay? Richer understanding po yan. Richer understanding of the past. Okay? So, hindi lang po iisang party, hindi lang po iisang tao, hindi lang po iisang source, yung pwede magbigay sa atin ng information, ng complete na understanding, but also the other sources that may or may not agree with the first evidences na mayroon tayo. Okay? So, balik tayo sa case ni Christine Dacera. Sa case ni Christine Dacera, it was a divided investigation conducted by the NBI and as well as the PIDEA, as well as by the Philippine National Police. Okay, it was a different investigation. And iba rin po yung ginagawa ng ating mga mga sini mga jurisdictions. Okay? So, you see, magkakaiba-iba sila ng sources. Magkakaiba-iba rin po sila ng statements. But, iba-iba rin po yung mga statements ng mga witnesses. Okay? So, it will give us a complete and more complex, a richer understanding of what happened in the case of Christine Becerra because we have incorporated different sources. Can you imagine if iisa lang nag-conduct ng source? Or can you imagine if we only relied with the witnesses' statements or if we only relied to the previous investigation at hindi tayo nag-conduct ng secondary investigation? Diba? It will be lack, no? It will be a very patchy, no? Very fragmented lang na understanding of what really happened to her case. No? So that's an advantage to the different sources. Okay? Advantage lang pala, walang disadvantage. Okay? So, ayun po, if historical writing are biased, partial, and it contains preconception, does it mean that we cannot believe history books anymore? Why or why not, no? So, that would be the question that would be imposed to you guys, and you ponder on that statements, no? But we have already answered that one earlier. That even though historical writing is biased, even though it is partial, and it contains preconception, we still need to consider that these historical writing are valid until proven wrong. Okay, until proven invalid. Para siyang nasa trial, no? Innocent until proven guilty. Kasi nga, these historians, when they wrote history, they have undergone historical methodology. And it is also based upon their historical interpretation. Kaya nga, mahalaga na isubject natin siya sa interpretation, criticism, and multi-perspectivity. Okay? Okay, so we only have less than a minute. Let me end this conference and let's return for the last time for our monitoring. Okay, so